We of Water are delighted to continue to sponsor this event now in its 26th year. And again, we never know who's coming. So yes, Teresa has also passed around candy if you need a little something at this hour of today. So we'll just pass it right here. Water's commitment to working for justice invites us to make a land acknowledgement. So if you'll join me, since I don't live here, I base my statement on the words of University of Denver's acknowledgement, because I think those folks here in Denver, including colleagues at the Iowa School of Theology, are among our closest colleagues in the field of religion. So I will use their land acknowledgement for my own. I quote them: "We are on the lands that are held in stewardship by the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes. It's with much gratitude that we recognize the descendant communities of the Northern Cheyenne tribe of Montana, the Northern Arapaho tribe of Wyoming, and the Southern Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma. We remember that it is through their sacrifices that we're able to engage in learning and collaboration to further the study of higher education." Let's take just a moment to reflect on the injustices we seek to right with regard to the people on whose land we are privileged to sit today. If you'll join me just in a moment of silence. Again, I want to extend a warm welcome to each and every one of you. I regret that we do not have a live stream version of this meeting to share. As you know, the AAR this year is totally in person, and live streaming is not made easy. But I want to thank both Betsy and Nicole, who are making a video of this, which we will put up on the Water website. And I am also, they're both graduate students of Elime at Bethesco, and so we're very happy to have you both, and it's your first AAR, and we hope if this is like the caucus, your first afternoon sessions, that you'll become spoiled by this way of meeting with other colleagues and this way of being in communication and in community building with other people. You may or may not find this in the rest of the AAR. There may be some sessions where you'll be sitting looking at the backs of people's heads, and that's never a good pedagogical model. So thank you. They'll also be taking some still photos. If you don't want your photo taken, just let them know that, and that's fine too. It'll be everything will be on our Water website, www.waterwomensalliance.org. And I also write a report after every meeting, which you'll receive. And in addition, this year we're considering, and I want your feedback right off the top here, the possibility of an online meeting in early 2023 to include people who couldn't be here today. Are there, show of hands, would people find an online meeting useful? Yeah, I think so, especially for people from a distance looking who can't be here. And a lot of people can't be here. Are you noticing that a lot of your friends are not here? A lot of last-minute cancellations too, due to COVID. But we expected that. But it's still, I think, for our purposes, we really want to be as connected as we can. Once again, I want to say that it is our fortune to collaborate with the members of the AAR Women's Caucus, several of whom are with us today. This is always a cordial and sisterly work, and it's something I treasure, and I learned from the caucus, and I want to thank the caucus, but I especially want to congratulate you on your 50th year. I think we'll have a round of applause. I always say it's hard to start something, but I think it's harder to keep something going, especially something that's useful, you know? There's a kind of starting energy, and there's some of us who have a lot of starting energy. But the real work, when you think about it, was not simply what people did at the beginning, which was marvelous, and we thank them and regard them highly, but the work of people year in and year out, generation in, generation out, that has kept something like the caucus as a real thing at the AAR. And it also has functioned, in my view, and FLTN has a different function in a way, but it has functioned in a way as a counterbalance to the attempts to institutionalize and, I would say, colonize women's work at the AAR. And I think the caucus has always maintained a different approach to that. And I really thank you for that. And again, thank you for our collaboration now for many years. As some of you know, tomorrow the caucus will be having a session at 9 o'clock in their room, which is Convention Center 112, which they have decorated. and it will be on a book that was edited honoring Rosemary Ruther entitled Valuing Lives, Healing Earth, Religion, Gender, and Life on Earth, and it's edited by Teresa Ugar, Sarah Robinson, Lillian Dubé, and Teresa Hinga, published in Ukraine. And I think it is, I will offer that then just a short recap of this meeting, and I'll respond to 6 of the speakers. It will be a wonderful session tomorrow morning. And then also, so you know, on Monday from 5 to 6:30, the AAR is having another session on Rosemary, which will be from 5 until 6:30, and that's the kind of AAR, I think Women in Religion is co-sponsoring with them to put that on, so that'll be great. And then Teresa, do you want to mention your event tonight, just if people have any interest?
Yeah, so in this same room, which is very convenient, from 7 to 8:30, Sarah Robinson and I are organizing, or we're having a celebratory remembrance for Rosemary, just because we need to have a space so that we can kind of bring her here to the Women's Caucus, and it just seems so appropriate. It's the 50th anniversary, and I know she would want to be here. So we're bringing her into the space, so if you want to come and just share a story or just participate in the ritual, we'll be here. 7 to 8:30.
Okay, great. Thank
Which
you.
room? This one or one of the one?
It actually is in this room.
This room?
Yes,
Okay.
someone looked it up and it's actually in the same room.
And you have the chairs all set and everything?
Yeah, the chairs are all set in there.
For those of you who are new to FLTN, I want to simply say that we include not only this annual meeting, which is normally in person, although it has been hybrid in the past as well. We also have a Google list of which we send out things during the year, and there are some blue attendance sheets going around. And please sign up so that we have your current address, your current email, as it were, and you'll get the email on the FLTN list. And I think most of you get it, don't you? We send out other things, not simply related to the network, but other things that we think will be of interest. If you don't want to get it, just don't put me on the list or something. But we find that people generally want to be on the list. And if you want to post to the list, that's even better, because everything is not on social media. People do actually read some emails and look at things that way. So please sign up. Catherine Phillips has graciously agreed to circulate those papers, and she's keeping an eagle eye. So, and they're numbered right at the bottom right-hand corner. They're numbered, so they're numbered and counted. I want to just mention, people say, well, how does FLTN who pays for this? And I always say we at Water engage in drug sales. We go to Latin America, we can pick up a little something. But we've done that for years. But actually what happens is that this is paid for out of Water's program budget, and some of you are Water donors, for which I'm very grateful. But we have a saying at Water. We have some donors who are very generous who can donate. We have some people who participate who are not able to donate. And they are just as welcome as anybody who donates the largest sum. We have in fact, I don't even have any idea, because I don't do that part of the work, but we make no distinction between those who donate and those who don't. We need donations, that's how nonprofits work. But our feeling at Water is, if we share, it's a big if we share together, there's enough. If we share together, there's enough. So we have no fee for any programs at Water. We have 4 programs a month, and there's no fee for any of them. Anybody's welcome to join and come at their Zoom programs, a meditation, a liturgy, book talk, and often a tea. And people around, I can see faces around this circle who've been on those Water programs many times, and some have spoken on those programs. And we don't charge any fee for those. It's simply Water. And the Feminist Liberation Theologians is the same thing. So nobody's going to ask you for dues, or just know that donations to Water are welcome. And if you know people who are in a position to do that, great. If you are, wonderful. If you're not, don't let it trouble you in the least. Somehow, I don't know how, but somehow over 40 years, we have managed to do this in terms of Water. And I do believe it's if we share together, there's enough. And there are people who share. So anyway, it's just a little sense of this. I would like to read a little statement from the Ruther family. I had the opportunity to be in touch with what Rosemary used to call the daughters, Becky and Mimi, and I told them about these programs at the AAR, and I said, would you like to send some words to people, because people would love to hear, from you. So may I read now the statement from Mimi and Becky? It's really from the whole family. Greetings, they right to the American Academy of Religion. We are grateful to Mary and many others who have shared tributes, remembrances, and images of Rosemary. Along with her scholarship and activism, we are reminded of her originality, humor, and the many people she worked with and touched throughout the world. Rosemary leaves a legacy through her written work and through all of you, colleagues, educators, students of students, and friends. Thank you, and all the best from the Ruther family. So I share that with you because I know that when I get in touch with the daughters again, I will pass on our collective condolences and let them know what a marvelous experience it is to celebrate the life of their mother. I'd also like to thank in a special way Teresa and Janice, who I think were so dear to Rosemary and so present to her for all of us. Thank you both. Let me turn then to our program. As always, we will do what we do in this circle, which is to introduce ourselves. And tonight we will be brief and simply say something about our name and something about the work that we do and or something about Rosemary if you wish. But this is not a time to do what Teresa and others will do from 7 to 8:30. So this is not a time to memorialize Rosemary. This is a time to work together. And I think Rosie would love it, that we're gonna work together in what I call a mapping project of a very modest sort. But I've dummied up a little sheet. There's a sheet of paper, which Rosalind has here, we'll pass out shortly. We're gonna hear from some people who are bringing remarks to us. But then we're gonna sit together and do in groups and kind of try to map out what if we were gonna say, because I think we have to take our legacy, you know, you're gonna take it by the antlers, you're gonna take it right in your hand and say what your legacy is gonna be. And we have to say each other's legacy. And I think we're gonna today try to say something about Rosemary's legacy so that she doesn't get defined simply by people who never met her, never read much, and aren't on the same page in terms of these issues. And I want to do that in terms of feminist liberation theology. There can be other and many mapping projects of Rosemary, whether it be on Palestinian issues, on church history, whatever it may be. But today we're going to look at her legacy with regard to feminist liberation theology. So, the first will be the introductions. The second will be short remarks from colleagues. I had invited 3 colleagues to make remarks, all of whom said remarks, but none of whom would be here, which was my first clue that we were going to be a smaller AAR. Each one for a personal issue, not always happy, but with a personal issue. So I have asked other colleagues to read their pieces and also to add just their own few remarks at the end, so that will happen. And a fourth colleague from Italy, just out of the blue sky, said, well, here's what I'd like to say. And so we'll include her remarks as well. And then we'll spend time working on this mapping project. I predict that in time there'll be kind of a cottage industry of Ruther studies, dissertations, scholarly articles, profiles of the grand person she was, and so much more. So let us, as some of her colleagues, begin with our own appreciative assessment of her today. That's really the task. And I think it'll be fun, and I think Rosemary would think it was fun. And we won't, we don't have to do anything definitive, but I've asked Rosalind to look at it afterwards with me and just see what kind of comes back. So you'll see that in a minute. We'll close at 6, as we always do, so you'll be on to your next event. If we finish a little early, that's fine too. But I really want to say one more time how grateful I am for your participation and for your interest in feminist liberation theology and the work that we all try to do together. So let the introductions be brief. Your name, maybe preferred pronouns if you wish, like I'm Mary Hunt, she, her, Silver Spring, Maryland. I work at WATER, Women's Alliance for Theology, Ethics, and Ritual. And I think the thing about Rosemary's work that shaped me most was the hierarchical dualism. You really got a lot out of that. Sounds like an infectious disease or something, but it really is like one of her signal concepts, hierarchical dualism. So that's how you do it. Doesn't, this is not dissertation material, but short and sweet. S&S, as we call it in my family. Rosalind?
I'm Rosalind Hinton. Here, I'll do this. I'm Rosalind Hinton, and I'm an independent scholar. And Rosemary was my mentor and my dissertation advisor. And the one thing that I could say that was important to me, and Stephanie mentioned that we've talked about, is she never taught from old material. She always learned by teaching new works. So she was always moving us all forward. And that's a great pedagogy for teaching.
Thanks, Vass. Tracy?
Hi, I'm Tracy McEwen. I'm from Sydney, Australia, and I'm affiliated with the University of Newcastle.
Excuse me, didn't you just finish your dissertation?
Yeah, I
And
did.
defend, I think, a round of
Sorry.
applause.
That's okay. So thank you so much. So I studied Catholic women, and the thesis focused on women from Generation X. But I guess Rosemary's work on Women Church has had probably the biggest impact on my scholarship.
Wonderful. Glad you're here.
My name's Fiona Dybel. I'm from Melbourne in Australia, and I've been guided here by my good friends. I work as a liturgist, as a musician, and as an educator, and I didn't know anything about Rosemary, and I wanted to come and find out.
Wonderful.
Hi everybody, I'm Jan Haas, and I live in Claremont, California. I'm working on my dissertation that isn't done yet. And I would say, things, because I've talked a lot about Rosemary in the last few months, and I would say some of the things I've missed is basically her sense of humor, which was, she knew how to get a jab into the church without really making it a jab, and she knew how to do that really beautifully. And I saw a side to her of her deep faith, which I think a lot of people haven't seen or didn't see.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Haewon Yan. I'm from South Korea. I'm with Ewha Women's University. I work at Korean Women's Institute as a research professor. My research field is basically intersectionality between religion, culture, and gender, and my case studies are usually Korean and Japanese Catholic women writers. I took Rose's class the first semester I was here in the US, and I didn't know how much sense of humor she had, so I struggled with it because a lot of the professors in Korea, they're very authoritarian and stern, so, but, yeah.
Welcome. Glad you're here.
I'm Elizabeth Fries, and I work with the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice right now in their Learning Center, doing content development. And I also teach Religion and Society at Truth Theological School. I just love the fact that really early on, Rosemary was working, to do intersectional work, and she had a really great Marxist edge. So her ability to critically integrate so many things before a lot of people were putting those things together commonly, I think was really influential for me.
Hi, I'm Laura Stivers. I teach ethics at Dominican University of California. And I didn't know Rosemary, but her work in feminist theology has informed me because I did my graduate work in the 80s and continue to keep reading her. So.
My name is Tracy Ugar, and I currently teach at Cal State University, Los Angeles, and there's so many things about Rosemary to be able to comment on, but I will say that I appreciate her Catholic feminism and the sense that she made a choice that she wanted to stay in the church to transform the church. So that gives me chills. It's like going, not only is she a model for me in terms of a teacher, scholar, and activist, but I appreciate that she's, decided to stay within the church to change it.
Hi, I'm Connie Steele. I'll be teaching with Yale's Life Worth Living initiative in the spring. And I didn't know Rosemary, but the way y'all talk about her reminds me a lot of how we felt in my department at the University of Texas about Barbara Harlow, who was also a feminist liberation scholar, but she wasn't a theologian. She was postcolonial literature So anyway, sorry for your loss, and I look forward to hearing more about it.
Welcome.
So I'm Leah Tarragon-Zeller. I also did not get to know Rosemary, but I've been looking at her for a few moments right there. And it's very special to get to know someone through friends and colleagues, so I'm happy for this moment. I teach at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and very avid Jewish feminist, and it's always wonderful to learn from other traditions as well. We're all the same struggle.
I remember the excitement I had. Okay, my name is Jayashitra Lalita. You can call me Chitra, easy. I'm a New Testament person, currently working at gender sexuality exploration into the historicity of Mary Magdalene. I remember with excitement about, the excitement I had running into a room to see Rosemary in an AR meeting about 13 years ago. So I still hold that excitement because of the Christology she developed. I was checking that the brilliant question, can a male savior save women, had totally overturned the discussions on Christology and how that has been used against women and women's ordination. So Asian women, especially who, we remain grateful to the wonderful work she had been involved in, which helped us to, gain ordination. So I really appreciate the amount of work she has put in. Even though it didn't happen in Catholic Church, an Indian woman could be ordained because of the conversations initiated by brilliant scholars like her.
Thank you so much. Christine?
Hi, my name is Christine Pei. I'm an ethicist and teaching for the Religion Department and Women's and Gender Studies at Denison University, Granville, Ohio. I'm actually the neighbor of Elaine. She just
She's my husband's boss.
Not really. Not really. I don't pay him. But anyway, I always thought that Rosemary had a very interesting fashion style, and especially with her pants. And some of you might got a chance to see her pants with like lower pants, like around. Yeah, the signature pants. So once I was sitting at the table with Rosemary and Ivani Guevara, we had lunch together, so it was really fun to watch two of my teachers talking to each other. It's also sad, like my teachers are leaving one by one. She's a great feminist theologian, but I also like her as a social ethicist. So two of my favorite books from Rosemary are Christianity and Social System and America and America.
Great.
So I still have a critique of her chapter on the reunification of Korea's in Christianity and social system, but I really like two of her social ethics books.
Hello, my name is Patricia Madigan. I'm from Sydney, Australia too. And I didn't ever know Rosemary personally, of course, but remember being introduced to her writings in about the 1980s as feminism was sort of becoming known in the Catholic Church in Australia among young women. And it's interesting to see the smile on her face there because the thing I most remember is the things she wrote. She must have had a very cheeky sense of humour because she wrote all the reasons why women could not be priests. And we handed that around and everybody read it. We thought we had a great laugh over it. So it was really introduced us to the ideas of feminism.
Wonderful. Thanks for being here.
My name is Elaine Nogueira Guadici. I am at the Methodist Theological School in Ohio. The first time I met Rosemary, I think it's at the same time that Christina had lunch with her, because I met her because of Yvonne Guevara. And so she came to me and she said, and her husband was just like behind her, and she said, so I hear you writing a dissertation about Yvonne Guevara's theological trajectory. And I was like, yeah, I am. And she made kind of a joke, like, do you have what it takes, like, to do that? Like, are you really going to do this? And her husband pulled me and said, she's just teasing you, don't mind her, she's just like really like pulling her legs now. And I was like, okay. And so I was so nervous for meeting her for the first time. But it was such a special moment because she asked me so many questions, and I realized that, oh, here am I talking to Rosemary Luther about Yvonne Guevara's work while Yvonne Guevara is across the room. And I really appreciate her book, Woman Healing Earth, that came out in '77. And New Woman. What's the title of the book?
New Woman.
New Woman, New Earth.
New Woman,
Oh, yes.
New
So New Woman, yeah, 1996 is the Woman Healing Earth, New Woman, New Earth. And I always have a special connection because the book came out just like in the month of my birthday when I was born in 1977. And I have made the point to always teach on that book in my courses.
Wonderful. Great stories. Go ahead. Thank you.
My name is Wynn Whalen. I had Rosemary Luther as a teacher way back in the 80s when she was at Garrett in Chicago. And I don't remember her too much as far as that class goes, but what I do remember is when Sexism and God Talk came out, I was teaching a class called Women in Religion, and that book just articulated something that I had been feeling, but not being able really to articulate. And it's sort of like she gave me permission to say the things that I really had been thinking about and wanting to say. So I really love her for that.
Thank you so much.
Hello, my name's Catherine Masson. I come from Melbourne in Australia and teach at the University of California.
Bless you.
I guess I first heard about Rosemary Radford Ruther in the 80s when I was part of a small group that was reading Sexism and God Talk, and that sense of the world being transformed, because here was somebody saying stuff that people had read before. And then a couple of years ago, I taught, I'm part of a network in Melbourne, Australian Collaborators in Feminist Theologies. We have some subjects that we offer through the University of Trinity, and we taught a subject about foremothers collaboratively. And the students were just blown away by how Rosemary Radford Ruther could combine critical thinking, activism, intellectual work, a rounded life. So she's a towering figure.
Yeah. Thank you. Welcome. Kath?
Hi everyone, I'm Kath McPhillips and I'm at the University of Newcastle, just north of Sydney in Australia, and I'm a sociologist of religion and gender. So quite a few years ago, in the mid-1990s, my PhD thesis was on the women church movement, and I did a comparative analysis of Rosemary's work on women church and Elizabeth Shishapirenz's. And they're quite different if you know their approaches. So I sort of analysed it, and then I did an ethnography of the Sydney Women Church group and applied the insights. So after that, I started coming to the AAR. That was a bit tricky, meeting Elizabeth and Rosemary, and but I think my sort of what really inspired me about Rosemary was the way in which, I think you talked about the way in which she was able to kind of stay within the sort of the church culture and not feel like both she and Elizabeth were just absolute role models in claiming the church for women
and women not feeling that they had to move out to be authentic or real. And I think that was just such an important position. But I think for me, she was just a very prophetic voice in not just in what she wrote, but in how she lived. And her understanding of power was just fundamental to my approach to my work and to social activism. So great debt.
Yeah. Ulrike.
Yeah, my name is Ulrike Auger. I live in Berlin and work at Humboldt University in Berlin, and also at the moment at Hamburg University. I'm specialized in theory, now gender, queer and post-colonial, post-secular theories, but I started off with feminist liberation theologies. So I have a background in Protestant theology, and I'm also an ordained minister in Protestant theology in the Lutheran Church in Germany. And I've known Rosemary for several years, meeting her during the sessions here at AR, but also during other conferences. And what I really appreciated was that she had all these very important, eminent things to say that we do need today. So she spoke about, she critiqued sexuality, she had a critique on ecology already, and also her political interventions in the world were very important. And I think there she was really, as you said, a prophetic voice. She did say many things earlier than others, and that's why her books are still so very important. And what I also do appreciate is that she was a theologian, a theoretical person, but also an activist. And she also showed us that we need to take this together, and this is also what we, I think, should do.
Thanks so much. Great. And we'll turn to you.
I'm Elizabeth Ersick. I work in the area of gender, religion, and the arts. I'm a professor of religious studies in Mesa Community College and also the California Institute of Integral Studies. And I would say that Rosemary's work in many stages have influenced me, and her ecofeminism just brought things into crystal clarity.
Thank you so much. And how about our colleagues who are
Oh, hello. Just kidding. I'm Bethany Davey. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a very grateful student of Dr. E's. And I'm just getting to know Rosemary, and so I'm grateful to Dr. E for introducing us. I can already tell she's going to be an impactful person in my journey. So I'm glad to be with all of you too.
I'm so glad you're here.
And I am Nicole Guthrie, she, her, and I'm also a student of Dr. E's and just getting to know Rosemary as well. And recently I was gifted a bunch of feminist scholar theologian books, and many of them were Rosemary's, so I'm really excited to explore that more. And most of everything I've read that's from feminist liberation theologians and ecofeminists have really changed me and changed the whole trajectory of my life, so very grateful.
Wonderful. Thank you all. As I said earlier, I'm Mary Hunt, she, her pronouns, and I just have two very quick anecdotes to share. I will be talking at the AAR session on Monday. I'm going to describe Rosemary Ruther as great and good. And I'm going to say that I don't know many people who are both, but Rosemary Ruther truly was great, and we'll talk about that in terms of her work. She was good. She was such a good person. And I don't say that lightly. But I do have two quick anecdotes. One is that Christine, you sparked it by talking about Rosemary's sartorial splendor. And I want to tell just the day that I met Rosemary Ruther, which was my first week at Harvard Divinity School. I was all of 21, and Rosemary sat down next to me in the cafeteria. She was wearing a purple pantsuit. I had never seen a purple pantsuit before. She had a briefcase, which some of you may have seen, that had a bumper sticker that said "Question Authority." This was in 1972, before many of you were born, and I was 21. And Rosemary sat down next to me, we had our trays. Hello, how are you? Hello, your name? And all of a sudden a woman came up and said to Rosemary, oh, Rosemary, there's a meeting of the Women's Caucus in the small dining room, come right along. And I sort of chopped liver, sat there, you know, with my mid-bite, and Rosemary said, oh, fine, you know, not goodbye, you know, enjoy your lunch, no, come along, nothing. So I just kind of sat there, and I thought, something has just happened to me, I'm not sure what it was. Because I didn't know where the small dining room was, and I certainly didn't know what the Women's Caucus was. And that was my start in feminist studies of religion. And the other story that goes with it is from, and I know these are almost apocryphal, they're so old, but was in 1970, same year, more or less, maybe into early 73, I don't know, but we were in Rockefeller Hall, which was paid for by the Rockefellers. And so we, student peons were up in the, you know, on the floors. We could smell when they had the dinner for the donors and the VIPs. We could smell the delicious smells. We had a little, whatever we had for dinner. And we could smell it wafting up to us, and we were kind of looking down. And Rosie was, she had the Stillman chair that year, which in fact became a folding camp stool when they found out who she was. So it was kind of a tryout to be the Stillman professor, and it didn't quite work. But she had a brilliant year of research and so forth. But Rosie was down at the dinner, and it was told to us later that when the son, one of the Rockefeller's sons, got up and extolled the virtues of his father is just the greatest guy in the world, you know, extolled the virtues. And Rosemary, in a stage whisper, was heard to say, "Didn't that man have a mother?" And so it was so classic. Didn't that man have a mother? You know, so she had it. You know, she and I love that about her. That was my first introduction to Rosemary's, not only her humor but her chutzpah, to be able to say, in a setting like that. I wonder if she'd get the chair, but in a setting like that, did that man have a mother? Because it was exactly the right thing to say. So, anyway, those are just there are tons of stories from people of my age cohort who knew Rosemary a long time ago, and they're all one. You know, they're just anyway. There's a lot of wonderful material out there because she was both great, as we have said, and good. So we turn to remarks. I invited 3 people to come: Susan Thistlethwaite, Teresia Hinga, and Lisa Isherwood, all of whom graciously accepted my invitation and planned to be here. None of them could make it for reasons of their own. So I'm going to start with Susan Thistlethwaite, President Emerita of Chicago Theological Seminary, and Tracy McEwen has graciously agreed to read Susan's remarks, and then to add a few of her own. So we'll get sort of prime the pump here, and then we'll move into our namming. Go ahead, Tracy.
So Susan writes, from academic years 1984, 1985 until 1990, 1992, Rosemary and I team taught a course together. The catalogue description reads, TEC 495, Women in Crisis. Crisis is in women's lives with particular attention to issues of violence, combined historical and cultural background, social economic analysis, practical experience, and models of decision-making. Teaching that with Rosemary is hands down the highlight of my teaching career. I first met Rosemary when she came to give a guest lecture at Duke Divinity School, where I was a seminary student from 1970 to 1973. There were 4 women in the school and 234 or so men at that time. I and one other woman showed up for Rosemary's lecture. The all-male faculty members sat in the back row of the auditorium, the male students in the middle, and we 2 women in the front. Rosemary was her usual witty, brilliant self, speaking on St. Augustine and his physical problem with controlling his will. Some of you might know the lecture I mean. The lecture is, as published, is called Augustine's Penis, Misogyny in the Church Fathers. I was not the same person after that lecture than I was before, and I can remember looking at the all-male faculty and the male students as I was exiting thinking, they're terrified of her, with good reason, and I wanted to be like her. But it was hard. When I joined the Chicago Theological Seminary faculty a decade or so later, to get over my starstruck admiration for this brilliant and courageous scholar. We met for a second time at a faculty gathering of the Chicago area seminaries where Rosemary was on the Garrett faculty. It took about 2 minutes into our meeting for Rosemary to sweep away the hero worship I had and replace it with her inimitable energy and intellectual curiosity. Who was I? What was I teaching? What was I writing? What were my kids' names? What were my dogs' names? We spoke often on the phone, and a year later we had crafted the syllabus for Women in Crisis, and we were teaching together. Since Garrett is on the north side and CTS on the south side of Chicago, we arranged to often teach in a battered women's shelter downtown. Changing the location added tremendously to the changed dynamic we were trying to create. Every woman lives with the spectre of violence and often carries the physical memory of violence done to her. We needed not only to be in our seminaries, but in a women-defined space dedicated to safety and honesty about women's lives. I had done counselling at a battered women's shelter outside Boston, and Rosemary, of course, knew the historical and cultural roots of the ubiquitous violence in women's lives better than anyone. We had a goal in that class, and that was for us all to get to the place where we had a concrete answer to the question, so what are you going to do about it? I also recall that we constantly changed the reading and assignments as those classes unfolded. I know it made some students upset that 1 week to the next they could not necessarily count on what the syllabus said, but our shared view was that life was unfolding in the class and we had to engage it. While an incredible historian, Rosemary was a liberation theologian, engaging life as it is really lived and doing critical analysis on the forces conspiring to oppress and harm people is the essence of liberation theology. Rosemary and I did not see each other nearly as much after we taught that class, but I have many wonderful AAR memories of seeing her and sitting down for just a chat at the blast for hours. Rosemary Radford-Ruther was the singularly greatest influence on my intellectual life, and I am grateful beyond words for her life and work. So in response, I wrote this. In the preface of my PhD dissertation, which I submitted in February this year, I reflected on what me, at the beginning of my studies, would have thought if she'd come across me some 6 years later. If I reflect honestly, when I began my research in 2016, I was rather ambivalent about feminism and its contribution to religion. Now I'm ardently feminist and consider myself a feminist scholar and am heavily involved in feminist activism. Thinking back, there were several key moments which brought about this self-transformation, and many of them involved Rosemary. One of the first moments was one of my early meetings with my PhD supervisor, Kat. I don't know whether you remember this. I asked where I should start my reading for my literature review, and she directed me to the work of Rosemary Radford-Ruther and Elizabeth Schultz-Franza. My reply was, aren't they a bit radical? Very patiently, Kat suggested I read and make up my own mind, and so I did. The first work I read was Rosemary's Misogynism and Virginal Feminism in the Fathers of the Church, in an edited volume of Religion and Sexism. Interestingly, that's the same essay published in a different form as Augustine's Penis that Susan talked about. There was no going back. Just like Susan said, I was not the same person. Rosemary's books were radical, and I think I was beginning to be radicalised. So in late 2017, I came to my first AAR SBL meeting, and there another key moment happened. I arrived in Boston, not knowing anyone, and attended my first FLTN meeting on the Friday night. It was there I heard the news that Rosemary was unwell, and the ground really shifted for me. Being a passive bystander was no longer an option. The question rolling around in my mind was, so what are you going to do about it? It often strikes me that a woman I never met had such a profound impact on my life. I'm now Vice President of WATAC, an activist organisation in Australia, Women in the Australian Church, is what WATAC stands for. It's a feminist ecumenical activist organisation So this organisation, which began in 1983, continues to be inspired by Rosemary's Women's Church movement and Elizabeth Schultz-Frenz's discipleship of equals. Thanks to this legacy, Christian feminism as an activist movement is growing rapidly in Australia. Since 2019, WhatHac's paid membership base has more than doubled, and our private Facebook page has gone from 5 to more than 750 members. We have monthly Zoom meetups and regional in-person groups. In 2021, we launched with the Grail in Australia a podcast called Australian Women Preach, which celebrates the diverse preaching talents of Australian women. In the recent plenary council of the Catholic Church in Australia, women and their allies stood in solidarity when a motion affirming the equal dignity of men and women failed to pass the deliberative vote of the bishops. This kind of solidarity among Catholic women in Australia is unprecedented. As I look back and I look forward, the legacy of Rosemary's scholarship is like a beacon of light for Christian feminism in Australia. Like Susan, I'm enormously grateful for her life and work.
Thank you so much, both of you. Yeah, that's the story. So our next speaker, Teresa Hinga from Kenya, who's now a professor of religious studies at Santa Clara University, one of the co-editors of the book, Under Discussion Tomorrow. Teresa couldn't be with us, but her friend Russell Hinton will read her piece and make a couple of comments of her own. So go ahead.
So this is what Dr. Hinga wrote. I met Rosemary Ruther in the writer long before I met her in person. This was around 1983 when I had a PhD candidate at Lancaster University in England. I had, in a rather pioneering way, proposed to write my dissertation on women in African independent churches, focusing on the Legio Maria Church of Kenya as a case study. Her book, Sexism and God Talk, alongside Elizabeth Schussler-Fiorenza's In Memory of Her, were among the books in my literature review, as is customary in dissertation writing. Both were pioneer works in feminist theology, while Rosemary pioneered in ecofeminist thought, or in the words of one of her titles, Gaia and God. Later on in the 1990s, I came to work at DePaul University in Chicago. Rosemary was teaching at Garrett Theological Seminary, also in Chicago, and was in the middle of editing her book, 1996, on Orbis, Women Healing Earth, Third World Women on Religion and Ecology. Determined to amplify African voices, she came to my apartment to recruit and encourage me to write an essay for the book, namely Gikuyu Theology of Land, which appears in the book and features indigenous Gikuyu voices on religion and ecology. Not only was she determined to be inclusive, she was determined to be a friend. A sense of mutuality grew between us as she would guest speak in my classes on feminist theology, and I would guest speak on women in African Christianity in her classes. Another space of encounter and collegiality was in connection with the Beijing UN Women's Conference. We were invited to offer Catholic perspectives on the conference. In collaboration, we wrote a document entitled Catholic Perspectives on the Eve of Beijing, supported by Catholics for a Free Choice. Later, Rosemary left Garrett to go into retirement at Pilgrim's Place. She continued to be active in academics, including being a panelist at an AAR panel which I organized, and where she presented a paper on Professor Wangari Maathai, Nobel Peace Prize winner for 2004. Fast forward to 2016 and the Catholic Theology Society of America conference in Albuquerque. The theme was religion and ecology. I proposed a panel on the theme featuring Lillian Dubé, Teresa Ugar, and Sarah Robinson. The presentations were well received, and the audience encouraged us to publish a book out of those proceedings. So this is the founding of tomorrow's panel. We followed through with a call of papers and published with Peters a book entitled Value in Lives Healing, Earth, Women, Religion, and Life on Earth. This book is on display and will be commented on at the 2022 AAR. We are also planning a sequel comprising of papers that did not make it into the first volume due to restrictions of space. Alas, Professor Ruther suffered a stroke and recently passed on due to complications thereof. She leaves a rich legacy as a feminist Catholic theologian and as an ecofeminist. I am privileged to have met her, and she enriched my life immensely. Rest in peace, Professor Ruther, colleague, friend, and mentor of many.
Lovely.
And I once interviewed Rosemary and for Cross Currents, and I asked her why she stayed a Catholic. And to her, she said it wasn't difficult. She just called herself church and carried on. So that was her approach to activism, and it came from the Church's People of God from Vatican II. And she was the church. Rosemary told me she tithed to the Catholic Church. She gave them 10% of her time. She didn't think it was advisable to knock her head continually against a brick wall, but that some things just needed to be said, and she was going to say them. And another thing that it actually just came up a minute ago when you were speaking. She was a great strategist and really understood power, and that's been said. She was saying she was at a conference in Chicago and was going down the elevator when she heard a bishop discuss that they needed to unload all these Catholic dioceses. They thought they'd just give them to women because the cities were crumbling at the moment, and they just wanted to unload them. And so she created a network in Chicago of all the women-led churches. And they started to devise strategies of serving the poor who were left in their communities. And then it came back, she said, it was a wonderful thing when all the baby boomers started to move back to the cities, and all of those parish churches were becoming rich again. And had more money to do their work. So she was a brilliant strategist, and just met life where it was.
Thank you so much. Thank you in absentia. Thank you to Tracy and Inga. Rosemary had a lot of interest in Judaism, and had an uncle, a Jewish uncle, with whom she was very close. But she also said famously that it wasn't because Catholicism was better than any other tradition, it was just that it was hers, and so she would be the fly on the back of the Catholic horse, as opposed to being the fly on the back of some others. We turn now to Lisa Isherwood's comments. Lisa, as many of you know, is a professor at the University of Wales, Trinity St. David, and she is famous for her British-Irish summer school, among her many projects and many edited volumes, as well as her own writing. And Elizabeth Ersich has very kindly agreed to read her paper, and the paper is really long, so I'm going to give Elizabeth a high sign when we get into about 6 minutes or so, and then I will let you know that we will make these papers available, so that will be that. Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm reading this with great affection and admiration for both Rosemary and for Lisa. I wish Lisa was here with us, and I'm going to apologize that you have to listen to her wonderful words filtered through an American accent instead of her lilting cadence. I first met Rosemary some 30 or more years ago, and
and what struck me immediately was the down-to-earth, no-fuss woman who carried her scholarship very lightly. This was no prima donna, which for me was a huge relief because, of course, having read her work, I felt in awe. Very quickly, after the formal introduction, we got on to her pride in her border Scots heritage. Tough guys, she said, who knew what was right. Ferocious, in fact. The descendants of people who kept the Romans out of Scotland and sent King Edward on his way to think again, which they remind the English each time they sing their national anthem. So, people with a long memory and brave hearts. I think that both these characteristics can be seen in Rosemary's work. Her MA was Roman history and her PhD in classics and patristics, giving her a firm grasp of the history of the church, and as we know, she was fearless about the topics in which she engaged. Her no-nonsense approach, embedded in precise scholarship, was challenging for those she addressed and the students who read her work. As we know, her brave heart did not simply find an outlet on paper. During the summer of 1965, Rosemary, who was already involved in civil rights for African Americans, traveled to Mississippi with other students and faculty to work with the Delta Ministry. She describes this as a turning point in her self-awareness as she weighed the possibility of dying, since violence was at its height in these years, and the obligation to do the right thing. This was a hard decision for her, since by this time she and Herc had 3 children under 7 years of age. Despite the possible cost, she went. While this can be seen as a very public act Rosemary also faced, as so many women did and do, battles of a more personal nature were there as well. On finishing her PhD, her supervisor simply assumed she would be delighted to accept a position as his assistant, an idea that never entered her head. She wanted an academic career of her own. He was not amused, but we are forever grateful and delighted. Whenever I had the honor of introducing Rosemary at conferences, she always reminded me, with a glint in her eye, "Don't forget to tell them I'm a tomato grower." I never forgot. Who would? Those inquiring eyes on them, and it always made her accessible to the often mixed audience. After the long list of publications and achievements came the tomatoes, and the impact of this was summed up, I think, by a man I overheard on one such occasion saying, "She does all that and grows tomatoes." Rosemary's output was indeed prestigious. She wrote hundreds of articles, chapters, and books, and over 50 authored or co-authored books. The breadth of her coverage was so impressive, and she was often the first to tackle an issue with her sharp feminist mind. When she and Herc came to stay with me in Wales, I got a glimpse into how impressive output was done. Rosemary would start writing at 5 a.m., be finished up with a hearty breakfast by 8:30, and ready for a day of adventure, meeting new people and seeing new places. This was the key to understanding not just about the amount of work, but the process. Rosemary always wanted to meet new people and learn about new things, see new places, and hear of social situations. And it was this, as much as the hours in front of the computer, that led to the amazing output, so thoroughly grounded in life. She told me a story at her own cost of when she was on a visit to Latin America. She happened to remark to her companion that strawberries in the field were a vivid red and looked delicious. "Yes," came the reply, "red with the blood of workers who are exposed to pesticides that keep the fruit red and kills them." Experiences such as this and many more were never forgotten and were used to deepen and broaden her theological thinking. This was just one example of how her theology was rooted in the lives of people, and although theoretically profound, never lost touch with the nitty-gritty of everyday life. Her work is marked by constantly presenting received wisdom with lived experience and not being afraid to embrace the outcomes. Rosemary's life and ability to hear the voices of others raised questions that fed her theology, and this was the case with her initial article. Having been told by a Catholic priest that she and Herman were expected to produce a child in their first year of marriage, she cast her eye on the Catholic Church and contraception. The The outrage that spurred her writing was fueled by a conversation she overheard while in hospital after the birth of their first child. The woman in the next bed had already 9 children, and the doctors advised she may die if she had more. The woman's response infuriated Rosemary as she told the doctor her priest and husband would not allow her to use contraception. This topic and that of abortion have been topics she returned to many times over the years as she saw the church stance affecting women globally. Rosemary did not write, she also became involved in Catholic organizations addressing these issues and campaigning for them. She goes on with many other comments, and those will appear in the written remarks.
That's right. Thank you, and in absentia, thank you to Lisa Isherwood. She sent a very long piece, which I hope will be part of a volume that she's, Teresa, I know you're involved in that too, and Jan as well. It was just a wonderful piece, but we've asked our remarks for our remarks to be short today. So I'm going to turn, with thanks to both you and to Lisa, to Catherine Phillips, who's going to read remarks from a woman by the name of Elizabeth Green, who is a Baptist minister in Italy. She's a feminist theologian, a member of the Italian Association of Women Theologians. She's written on Rosemary Ruther, including the introduction to the Italian version of Gaia and God. And when she sent this sort of over the transom piece, I thought, how lovely. Let's hear from Italy. And so, Kath, please.
Thanks, Mary. Rosemary Radford Ruther is one of the few North American theologians, some of whose work has been made available to the Italian public. Her 1972 work, Liberation Theology, Human Hope Confronts Christian History and American Power, was possibly one of the first works of feminist theology to be published in Italy under the title For a Theology of the Liberation of Woman, Body and Nature. Later, in 1995, Gaia and God was translated into Italian, as has been her well-known essay, Can a Male Saviour Save Women?, in a collection edited by Mary Hunt and Rosino Ghibellini in 1980. Rosemary, whom I only met on one fleeting occasion, has been, through her books and articles, a constant source of inspiration for me. I have often used her analysis of distorted dualisms in my own writing and in my teaching. Her use of Simone de Beauvoir has made her concepts translatable into Italian feminist theory, which at one time was highly indebted to the thought of Luce Irigaray. I understand Rosemary to have been an intersectional feminist before the term was coined, and her work has enabled us to hold together different forms of exclusion and what we once called oppression. I am thinking not only of her work on women and nature, but also on sexuality in the family, globalization, and the divine feminine in her book Goddesses. While some of her writing has been mainly focused on the North American context, the topics I have mentioned and more continue to be relevant to our world and to the theological reflection here in Italy. I'm pleased to remember and honour Rosemary as one who has gone before, opening up paths of theological reflection for women and men yet to be fully explored.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Elizabeth Green. How wonderful to have her words with us and her experience with Rosemary. So I think we now have a lot on the table about Rosemary. Several details that were left out were that she only gave 900 lectures in 24 countries. So, yes. And you know, there are just so many aspects of her work that you can't even believe it. You know, you get to a point and say, my goodness, how did she do that? But she did it with support, both I think from family and friends. And she certainly was blessed with a good marriage and a wonderful circle of friends. In fact, some of those, Tracy, friends at the Garrett from Susan Thistlethwaite, the rumor was that Rosemary had 14 honorary degrees and a lot of headgear from those, and that on occasion, when the women would have their parties, they would model Rosemary's headgear from various and sundry universities. It was her costume, so it was kind of a fun thing that they did. Let me turn to what I'd like to do this afternoon, and I beg your indulgence on it because I think it'll be fun. I also think it'll be useful, and that is, and Rosalind has the mapping. I have just put together a couple of questions, and I'm going to invite us to take literally no more than 5 minutes to put our own initial thoughts down. And if you don't know Rosemary, if you didn't know her, don't worry, just leave it blank. And everybody will do one. And then we'll collect them later, but then we'll have a little time in small groups. Yeah, pass it around. We'll have a little time in small groups to talk to each other. What I'm trying to do is, many of us who knew her, some of us are what Sheila Briggs called the dinosaur generation of feminist theologians. Some of us dinosaurs will not be around much longer with our compos mentis to be able to reflect on these things. But it's also important. Can you come into the circle? I feel bad.
Okay, you got two.
No.
Okay, I can give one to me.
Yeah, back to brief for a couple people? Yeah. Okay, but the papers will be on your chairs, and take a minute to write these things down. Come on into the circle if you can, because it's always good that we don't have to shout, and it has more of a feel of working together. And then we'll have a little time, but what are the top 3 areas of her scholarship? We're talking about feminist liberation theology. What are some of the other areas? What book, lecture, or course, or article best captures her thinking for you? If you were going to explain her work, her impact and scope for an undergraduate audience, what would your first 2 sentences be? As you think globally about feminist studies and religion, how do you assess Rosemary's contribution? What do you think in the global picture of feminist studies? Imagining what might have been unfinished on Rosemary's desk when she stopped working, what would you hope that she might tackle that you can now explore? Isn't that a fun question? Imagine what was on her desk. Imagine when she had this devastating stroke. Imagine what was on her desk. I can't even begin to think about that. What was on Rosemary's desk? And what was she going to look at next that you can now take up? And finally, just add any comments or reflections or suggestions regarding her legacy for feminist liberation theology. Just kind of a mapping exercise. And if you want, you're more than welcome. I'll put this up, online. So if you've got other people, if you have a bunch of students who, have studied Rosemary and so forth, would like to join in this, I think it's really exciting that those of us who are still in her orbit, those of us who knew her fairly well, and all others who were her students, and as her daughter said, her students. So give it a shot. See what you come up with.